My name is Elena. I'm 28. And up until last Thursday, I believed that family was the one thing in this world you couldn't be kicked out of. I was wrong. Thanksgiving dinner at my older sister Isabel's house was always a performance, a carefully staged production of perfection. Her husband, Mark, a real estate developer with a smile as polished as the marble countertops in their kitchen, would play the role of the generous patriarch. Isabel, or Izzy, as she insisted everyone call her, was the director, the star, and the critic, all rolled into one. Her home in the pristine Connecticut suburbs wasn't just a house, it was a testament to her success, a life curated for Instagram, where every throw pillow and artisanal cheese board screamed, "We've made it." My role in this annual play was always the same. The quiet, slightly awkward younger sister. The one with a strange, dusty job that no one quite understood. The one who was, in the kindest terms, a work in progress. But this year, I was the character who was unceremoniously written out of the script in the middle of the first act. The reason? A painting. A dirty, forgotten, grime-covered canvas that I had rescued from our grandmother's attic a few weeks after she passed. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way Izzy's sterile, gallery-white walls were. It was dark, moody, and covered in a century's worth of neglect. But it was Grandma's, and as I held it, I felt a connection to the one person in our family who had ever truly seen me. The day started as it always did. I arrived exactly on time, holding a bottle of wine that was probably too expensive but still wouldn't be good enough, and a homemade pecan pie, my grandmother's recipe. Izzy greeted me at the door with a kiss that didn't quite land on my cheek. "Elena, you made it! Mark's parents just arrived. Try to be sociable this year, okay?" Her eyes darted down to the canvas I had carefully wrapped in a protective cloth and was holding under my arm. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched in disapproval. "What on earth is that?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if I'd brought a stray animal into her sterile environment. "It's from Grandma's attic," I explained, a little too eagerly. "I just wanted to show you. I think it might be something special." She sighed, a long-suffering sound she had perfected over years of being disappointed by me. "Elena, we have guests. Important guests. Mark is trying to close a deal with the Hendersons. Can you please just put that thing in the garage? It smells like mothballs." The rejection stung, but it was familiar. I had spent a lifetime being told my passions were inconvenient, my interests strange. I did as she asked, leaning the canvas gently against a stack of pristine, unused gardening supplies. Dinner was an exercise in tension. Mark held court at the head of the table, telling loud, booming stories about his latest commercial property venture, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, a couple who looked like they were carved from ivory, laughed at all the right moments. Izzy floated around, refilling wine glasses, her smile never faltering, but her eyes constantly scanning for imperfections. My pie was served and politely complimented, though Izzy made a point to mention that her caterer had provided a gluten-free, sugar-free pumpkin tart that was just divine. I tried to engage in conversation, asking Mr. Henderson about his import-export business, but my questions were met with polite, brief answers before the topic invariably shifted back to Mark's golf handicap or their upcoming trip to Aspen. I felt invisible, a ghost at the feast. The final straw came when Mark's mother, a woman named Beatrice who wore her pearls like armor, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Izzy jumped in. "Oh, Elena does the most fascinating work. She's an art restorer. She cleans old things." She said it with a tone that implied I was a glorified janitor. Mark chuckled. "That's right. She brought some old piece of junk from her grandmother's attic today. Wanted to show it off at Thanksgiving dinner." The Hendersons exchanged a look of mild amusement. My face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the roaring fireplace. "It's not junk," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It was Grandma's. I think it could be valuable." Izzy placed her hand on my arm, a gesture that looked comforting but felt like a vice. "Honey, not now. We're having a lovely evening." But I couldn't let it go. Years of being dismissed, of being made to feel small and insignificant, bubbled up inside me. "No, I want to show you. It'll just take a second." I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. The entire table went silent. Mark's face hardened. "Elena, sit down," he said, his voice low and threatening. Izzy's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed. "You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing this family in front of our guests." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the table at the faces staring at me, pity from Mark's mother, contempt from his father, and cold indifference from the Hendersons. I was the flaw in the perfect picture. "Get it," Izzy commanded, her voice like ice. "Get your precious painting and then get out of my house." The walk to the garage felt like miles. My hands were shaking as I picked up the wrapped canvas. I could hear their muffled voices from the dining room. Izzy's sharp and angry, Mark's placating. I didn't unwrap it. I walked back to the front door, my pie sitting uneaten on the counter, my coat still hanging in the closet. Izzy was waiting for me in the foyer, her arms crossed. "I can't believe you would do this to me. On Thanksgiving, of all days." I looked at my sister, at the woman who was supposed to be my closest ally, and I felt nothing but a profound, aching emptiness. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I turned and walked out the door, the cold November air hitting my face. As I drove away, the warm glow of her perfect house receding in my rearview mirror, I clutched the steering wheel with one hand and placed the other protectively on the dusty canvas beside me. She had kicked me out. She had chosen appearances over family, strangers over her own sister. But as I looked at the forgotten painting I had saved, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if I was right? What if this wasn't just some old piece of junk? What if this was the secret that could change everything? If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you want to find out what was hidden beneath a century of grime on that canvas, make sure you hit like and subscribe. Because my sister never, ever expected what was coming next. The drive back to my tiny apartment in the city was a blur of streetlights and shame. Each red light felt like a judgment. A pause forcing me to replay the scene in my head. Izzy's cold fury, the condescending smirks, the heavy, suffocating silence of that perfect dining room. It's a strange feeling, being exiled. It's not loud and dramatic like in the movies. It's quiet. It's the click of a door closing behind you, the sudden realization that you are on the outside looking in, and the warmth you thought was yours was never really meant for you. By the time I lugged the painting up the 3 flights of stairs to my walk-up, the weight of it felt less like wood and canvas and more like the physical manifestation of my family's disappointment. My apartment is the complete opposite of Izzy's house. It's small, a little cluttered, but it's filled with things that have stories. Books are stacked on every surface. Tools of my trade are organized neatly on my workbench, and the air smells of linseed oil and old paper, a scent I find deeply comforting. It's a space dedicated to bringing the past back to life, and tonight it felt like the only sanctuary I had in the world. I unwrapped the painting and placed it on my easel, the bare bulb of my workshop light casting harsh shadows across its cracked and darkened surface. It was a still life, I could tell that much. A vase of flowers, maybe some fruit on a table, but the details were lost under a thick, yellowish-brown varnish that had obscured the artist's original vision. I collapsed onto my worn-out sofa and did what any self-respecting outcast does on Thanksgiving. I ordered greasy Chinese food and called my best friend, Chloe. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, happy Thanksgiving! How was the lion's den? Did Izzy's head spin around, or did she manage to keep it together for the guests?" Chloe was the only person who understood the complex, toxic ballet of my family gatherings. I tried to laugh, but the sound came out as a choked sob. The whole story tumbled out of me, the dismissive comments, the garage, the final, brutal command to leave. Chloe listened patiently, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She just said, "Okay, I'm putting on my shoes. I'll be there in 20 minutes with a bottle of very cheap champagne and a pint of ice cream. Do not, under any circumstances, start watching a sad movie without me." True to her word, she arrived looking like a warrior of comfort, her arms laden with junk food. She took one look at me, wrapped me in a hug, and said, "Her loss, seriously. One day she's going to realize what a cold, empty life she's built for herself. Tonight is not that day. Tonight, we eat our feelings." As we sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by takeout containers, Chloe's presence slowly started to chase away the chill of Izzy's rejection. "So this is it, huh?" she said, nodding towards the easel, the painting that ended Thanksgiving. I nodded, my mouth full of noodles. She called it junk, smelled of mothballs. Chloe got up and walked over to it, peering at it with a critical eye. "Well, she's not entirely wrong about the smell," she joked. "But there's something about it. It's moody. I kind of like it." We spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, but my eyes kept drifting back to the canvas. It was more than just a painting to me. It was one of the last tangible pieces I had of my grandmother, Eleanor. While Izzy had inherited Grandma's expensive jewelry and antique furniture, things that had a clear, definable monetary value, I had been drawn to the attic, to the boxes of old letters, photographs, and forgotten objects. Izzy had called it hoarding. I called it history. Our grandmother was a quiet, enigmatic woman. She had been a librarian, a lover of books and art, and she had always encouraged my own passions. While my parents and sister saw my meticulous, patient nature as a flaw, Grandma Eleanor saw it as a gift. She's the one who gave me my first set of restoration tools when I was 16, a vintage kit she'd found at a flea market. "Some things are worth saving, Elena," she had told me, her eyes twinkling. "You just have to be willing to look past the dust." After Chloe left, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment was deafening. I walked back into my workshop and just stood before the painting, studying it. The frame was a simple, dark wood, chipped and scarred with age. The canvas itself was brittle, but as I ran a gentle hand over the surface, I felt an almost imperceptible hum of energy. A story waiting to be told. My grandmother had never mentioned it. In all our years of talking about art, she had never once spoken of a dark, forgotten, still life hidden in her attic. Why? Was it something she had bought and simply forgotten? Or was there more to it? My professional instincts, the ones I had spent years honing, began to kick in, overriding the emotional turmoil of the evening. I started to see the painting not as a symbol of my family's rejection, but as a puzzle. The thick, discolored varnish was a common problem in older paintings. It was often applied to protect the surface, but over time it oxidizes and darkens, obscuring the true colors beneath. The craquelure, the network of fine cracks on the surface, told me it was old, likely from the late 19th or early 20th century. My mind started racing. What if Izzy was wrong? What if everyone was wrong? My family saw my job as a quaint hobby, a little business I ran out of my apartment fixing chipped frames for little old ladies. They had no idea about the years of study, the apprenticeships, the deep knowledge of chemistry and art history required to do what I do. They didn't know about the quiet thrill of seeing a masterpiece emerge from centuries of neglect. They saw a cleaner of old things. I saw myself as a keeper of secrets. I made a decision then, standing in the stillness of my workshop in the early hours of the morning. I would restore this painting, not for them, not to prove a point or to get some kind of revenge. I would do it for me. I would do it for my grandmother. I would treat it with the care and respect it deserved. The care and respect my own family had never bothered to show me. I would uncover its story, whatever it might be. Whether it was a priceless masterpiece or a worthless amateur attempt, it didn't matter. The process, the discovery, that would be my victory. I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of my workshop filling my lungs, calming my frayed nerves. I felt a sense of purpose settle over me, a quiet determination that was far more powerful than Izzy's anger or Mark's contempt. They had pushed me out, but in doing so, they had pushed me back to the one place where I was truly in control, where my skills mattered. They thought they had left me with nothing but a piece of junk. But as I looked at that dark canvas, I had a feeling I was the one who had walked away with the real family treasure. The days that followed Thanksgiving were a strange mix of solitude and focus. The sting of Izzy's words hadn't faded, but I channeled that pain into my work, using it as fuel. My workshop became my world. The first step in any restoration is always documentation and analysis. Before I could touch the canvas with a single solvent, I had to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent 2 full days just observing and photographing the painting under different lighting conditions: natural light, ultraviolet, and infrared. Under the UV lamp, the old varnish fluoresced with a murky, greenish-yellow glow, confirming its age and thickness. It was like looking at a swamp, and somewhere beneath it was a hidden landscape. But the UV light revealed something else, too. Several small, dark patches that didn't fluoresce like the rest of the varnish. These were areas of old, retouching, clumsy repairs made by an amateur hand long ago. Someone had tried to fix this painting before, and they had done a poor job, adding another layer of mystery to its history. Who would bother to repair a worthless painting? The meticulous process of restoration is a slow, deliberate dance with the past. It's a conversation between chemist, historian, and artist. My first task was to perform a series of tiny cleaning tests in an inconspicuous corner of the canvas. This is the most nerve-wracking part of the job. You're applying powerful solvents to a delicate, centuries-old object. One wrong move, one miscalculation in the chemical mixture, and you could permanently damage the paint layer underneath. I mixed a tiny batch of a specialized solvent gel, designed to sit on the surface and soften the varnish without penetrating too deeply. Using a cotton swab no bigger than the head of a pin, I rolled it gently over a small square of the darkened edge. I held my breath, my face inches from the canvas, a magnifying visor strapped to my head. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as I lifted the swab, I saw it. A tiny fleck of grime and yellowed varnish came away, revealing a sliver of color so pure and vibrant it almost took my breath away. It was a deep, luminous cobalt blue, a color that hadn't seen the light of day in perhaps 100 years. My heart hammered in my chest. This was no amateur's work. An amateur wouldn't have used a pigment this rich, this expensive. That tiny window of blue was all the confirmation I needed. I spent the next week inching my way across the canvas, working square centimeter by square centimeter. The process was painstakingly slow. Apply the gel, wait 60 seconds, gently roll the swab, remove the softened varnish, then immediately apply a neutralizing agent to stop the chemical reaction. Repeat, thousands upon thousands of times. My back ached, my eyes burned from staring through the magnifier, but I was completely consumed. With each pass of the swab, Another piece of the puzzle emerged from the gloom. The murky vase of flowers transformed. It was a bouquet of deep red poppies and white lilies, their petals rendered with such life and texture I could almost feel their velvety softness. A pear and a cluster of grapes appeared on the table, each with a delicate, dewy sheen. The artist had a masterful understanding of light and shadow, of chiaroscuro. The background, which had seemed like a flat, muddy brown, resolved into a rich, dark tapestry, its woven patterns subtly catching the light. The painting was transforming before my eyes, from a forgotten relic into a work of astonishing beauty and emotion. It was melancholic, yes, but also defiant. The flowers vibrant against the encroaching darkness. It felt personal. As I worked, my mind kept returning to my grandmother. I started going through the boxes of letters I had taken from her attic. Most were mundane, correspondence with friends, old birthday cards. But in a box of her college notebooks from the 1952nd, I found something interesting. Tucked between the pages of a literature textbook was a faded photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, standing in front of an art gallery in Paris. On the back, in my grandmother's familiar, elegant script, was a name: Genevieve, Paris, 1953. I didn't know any Genevieve. Grandma had never spoken of a trip to Paris. This was a piece of her life I knew nothing about. I put the photo aside, my curiosity piqued, and returned to the painting. By the end of the second week, I had cleaned about half of the canvas. It was like seeing a person's face emerge from a fog. The composition was more complex than I had first realized, the interplay of light and color more sophisticated. And then I found the signature. It was hidden in the darkest shadow of the tablecloth, almost completely obscured. It wasn't a name I recognized. It was just a monogram. A stylized G.D. My hands started to tremble. G for Genevieve? D for who? My apartment, which had once felt like a cramped shoebox, now felt like the epicenter of a thrilling discovery. The outside world, with its family drama and Thanksgiving ultimatums, seemed to fade away. I was on a treasure hunt, following a trail of clues left decades ago. I knew I was reaching the limits of what I could do on my own. To truly understand what I had, I needed an expert. I needed someone with access to technology and databases that I didn't have. I needed my old mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was a legend in the art world, a professor emeritus at the university who had literally written the book on pigment analysis. He was brilliant, eccentric, and notoriously reclusive. He didn't suffer fools, and he certainly didn't waste his time on junk from the attic. Getting him to even look at the painting would be a challenge. I spent an entire evening composing an email to him, carefully choosing my words. I described the painting, the quality of the brushwork that was emerging, the mysterious monogram. I attached high-resolution photos of the cleaned sections alongside the untouched ones. I tried to sound professional and detached, tamping down the wild excitement that was threatening to bubble over. I hit send, my heart pounding. The response came less than an hour later, short and to the point. My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't be late. And for God's sake, make sure it's properly secured for transport. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. And it was the most exciting thing that had happened to me all year. As I carefully rewrapped the half-cleaned canvas, a new feeling began to replace the shame and hurt from Thanksgiving. It was a feeling of empowerment. My family had dismissed me, but they had also dismissed this. They had thrown away a secret, and I was the only one with the skill, the patience, and the passion to uncover it. The next morning, the city felt different. The air was crisp and cold, but I barely noticed. I felt a nervous energy crackling through me, a mixture of anticipation and sheer terror. Transporting a potentially valuable, fragile painting is a nightmare. I wrapped the canvas in archival glassine paper, then encased it in a custom-built, foam-lined crate I usually reserved for my most important clients. Every bump and pothole on the drive to the university felt like a personal attack. Dr. Finch's office was exactly as I remembered it. An organized chaos of books stacked to the ceiling, archaeological artifacts jostling for space with scientific equipment, and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco. He was a tall, thin man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Unpack it. Over there," he said, gesturing with his pipe towards a large, padded examination table under a bank of powerful, color-corrected lights. My hands felt clumsy as I carefully removed the painting from its crate and placed it on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just circled it, his eyes scanning every inch, his expression unreadable. He peered at the cleaned sections through a loop, then at the grimy, untouched half. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I was starting to think I had made a terrible mistake, that he was about to laugh me out of his office. Finally, he spoke. "The brushwork is confident. Aggressive, even. Look here," he said, pointing to the petal of a poppy. "This single stroke. There's no hesitation." The artist knew exactly what they were doing. He turned to me, his gaze sharp. "Where did you say you got this?" "My grandmother's attic," I repeated. "She passed away a few months ago," he grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. "And the monogram. GD means nothing to me offhand. But the style. It's reminiscent of the post-impressionists. But there's a darkness here, a modern sensibility that feels familiar, yet I can't place it." He ran a hand through his already wild hair. "This is intriguing. Let's take a closer look." For the next 4 hours, I was his assistant again, just like in my graduate school days. We were no longer in an office, we were in a laboratory. "Doctor," Finch wheeled over a massive piece of equipment, an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer. "XRF," he explained, seeing my wide eyes. "It's non-invasive. We can bombard the surface with X-rays, and it will tell us the exact elemental composition of the pigments. Every artist has a unique palette, a chemical fingerprint." He carefully calibrated the machine and began scanning the canvas, section by section. The results appeared as complex graphs on a computer monitor. Dr. Finch stared at the screen, muttering to himself. "Titanium white. But it's the anatase form, not rutile. That places it firmly pre-1940. The cobalt blue is genuine, as you suspected. Expensive. Cadmium red. Interesting. Consistent with the period. He was creating a timeline, a history of the painting, through its very chemical makeup. But it was the analysis of the white pigment in the signature that made him pause. "Lead white," he murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "But look at the trace elements. Barium sulfate. A common extender, but this specific percentage, I've seen it before." He wheeled his chair over to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick, dusty folder, and began flipping through pages of old analysis reports. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was the moment of truth. Was it a known artist, or just a talented, forgotten painter? "Ah," he said, tapping a page with his finger. "Here at Island. A study we did years ago on a private collection. Same trace elements in the lead white. It was a unique batch mixed by a specific Parisian art supplier in the late 1920s. A supplier known to cater to a very particular group of artists." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with intellectual excitement. "We're getting warmer, Miss Rossi. Much warmer." The next step was infrared reflectography. This process uses a special camera that can see through the top layers of paint to reveal any underdrawings, the initial sketches the artist made on the canvas before they started painting. It's like looking at the skeleton of the artwork. We set up the equipment and slowly scanned the canvas. On the monitor, a ghostly image began to appear. Underneath the vibrant flowers and dark tablecloth, there was another composition entirely. It was a portrait, a woman's face, rendered with just a few deft charcoal lines. Her expression was sad, her eyes haunting. But what was a portrait doing underneath a still life? It was common for artists, especially struggling ones, to reuse canvases. But to paint over a portrait of this quality? It didn't make sense. Unless the artist wanted to hide it. Dr. Finch zoomed in on the underdrawing, his brow furrowed in concentration. Extraordinary, he whispered. The technique is flawless. Why would anyone paint over this? We spent the rest of the day in a blur of research. With the new clues, the Parisian supplier, the time period, the hidden portrait, we dove into art history databases, auction records, and catalogs of lost art. We cross-referenced every known artist who used that supplier, who painted in that style, who might have been in Paris in the late 1920s and early 1930s. The list was long and filled with famous names, but nothing quite fit. The monogram, G.D., remained a mystery. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, we were both exhausted and no closer to a definitive answer. Dr. Finch finally leaned back in his chair and sighed. I'm stumped. The quality is undeniable. The provenance is a complete blank. It's a ghost. I felt a pang of disappointment. We had come so far, only to hit a wall. As I began to carefully pack the painting back into its crate, my hand brushed against the back of the canvas. I felt something, a small rectangular bump under the brown paper backing that had been glued to the stretcher bars. My heart skipped a beat. Dr. Finch, I said, my voice trembling slightly. There's something here. We carefully placed the painting face down on the table. Using a delicate scalpel and a steam pencil to soften the old, brittle adhesive, I began to slowly, carefully, peel back the paper backing. It was a painstaking process, the paper threatening to crumble at any moment. But underneath it, nestled in a shallow recess carved into the wooden stretcher, was a small, folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a letter. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate and feminine. It was in French. Dr. Finch, who was fluent, leaned over my shoulder and began to read aloud. Mon cher, if you are reading this, it means the world has forgotten me, but you have not. This is my last work. They see only flowers, but I know you will see my face beneath. Keep her safe. They must never find her. Yours, Geneviève Dubois. Geneviève Dubois. The name echoed in the silent office. A name from a faded photograph. A ghost from my grandmother's past. Doctor. Finch and I stared at each other, the small, brittle letter lying on the table between us like a sacred text. All the pieces of the puzzle, the monogram, the hidden portrait, the French inscriptions snapped into place with a sudden, shocking clarity. Doctor? Finch was the first to break the silence, his voice a reverent whisper. My God, it can't be. He scrambled back to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He typed the name Geneviève Dubois into the most comprehensive art historical database in the world. For a moment, I thought the search would come up empty, that she was just another forgotten artist, lost to time. But then, a single, sparse entry appeared on the screen. It was more of a footnote than a biography. Dubois, Geneviève, French painter, B. 1905. Active in Paris, c. 1925 to 935. Associated with the Montparnasse School. Presumed deceased. C. 1942. No surviving works are known to exist. No surviving works. Dr. Finch read the words aloud, his voice filled with awe. Elena, if this is what I think it is, this isn't just a painting. This is a resurrection. The story that unfolded over the next few hours of frantic research was a tragedy. Genevieve Dubois had been a rising star in the vibrant, bohemian art world of 1922 Paris. Her work was celebrated by critics for its emotional intensity and bold technique. She was a woman in a man's world, a contemporary of Picasso and Modigliani, holding her own with a brush and a fierce vision. Her self-portraits, in particular, were said to be hauntingly beautiful and brutally honest. But her career and her life were cut tragically short. As the darkness of World War II descended upon Europe, Genevieve, who was of Jewish descent, became a target. Her art was declared degenerate by the Nazi regime. She went into hiding, and in 1942, she was captured and sent to a concentration camp, where she perished. In the chaos and horror of the war, her entire body of work, every painting, every sketch, was either confiscated, destroyed, or simply vanished. Art historians had mourned her as one of the great lost talents of the 20th century. Until now. Lying on the table in front of us, half cleaned and rescued from a dusty attic, was the only known surviving work of Genevieve Dubois. The hidden portrait beneath the still life, the one she called her face, was likely one of her last, defiant self-portraits. She had painted over it, disguised it as a simple floral arrangement, to protect it, to hide her identity from those who sought to erase her from existence. The weight of the discovery was immense. This wasn't just a valuable object anymore. It was a piece of history, a testament to survival, a voice that had been silenced for 80 years. And somehow, through a chain of events I couldn't begin to fathom, it had ended up in my grandmother's attic. The letter was addressed to Mon cher, my dear. Who was she writing to? How did my grandmother, a quiet librarian from Connecticut, come to possess this incredible secret? The photograph from the textbook flashed in my mind. Grandma Eleanor, Paris, 1953. 10 years after Genevieve's death, I realized my grandmother hadn't just taken a trip to Paris. She had been on a mission. She had been searching for something, or someone. I spent the next several days in a fugue state, working with Dr. Finch to prepare a formal authentication report. We documented everything: the XRF pigment analysis, the infrared reflectography of the underdrawing, the historical research on Genevieve Dubois, and, of course, the letter. Dr. Finch made some discreet inquiries with his contacts at major museums and auction houses. He never mentioned the artist's name, only describing a significant, lost work from the pre-war French school. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The art world is a small, insular community, and whispers of a discovery of this magnitude travel fast. One afternoon, Dr. Finch called me into his office. He looked more serious than I had ever seen him. Elena, we need to talk about value. I had deliberately not allowed myself to think about the money. The historical and emotional significance of the painting had consumed me. It's impossible to put a precise number on a piece like this, he began, choosing his words carefully. There are no auction precedents for her work, because none of her work has ever been sold. It's in a category all its own. It's not just art. It's a story, a historical artifact. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That being said, based on the quality, the story, and the artist's tragic importance, I have spoken to appraisers at both Sotheby's and Christie's. They are in agreement. Conservatively, This painting would start at auction for no less than $8 million. I think my heart stopped. I gripped the arms of my chair, the room tilting slightly. $8 million. The number was so vast, so disconnected from my reality of student loans and a leaky faucet, that it felt like a joke. It could go for much, much more, he continued softly. Possibly 10, maybe even 12. It depends on who wants it, and a lot of people are going to want it. I walked out of his office and into the cold December air, my mind reeling. $12 million for the piece of junk my sister had kicked me out of her house for. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. I thought about Izzy's perfect house, Mark's expensive car, their desperate need for the approval of people like the Hendersons. Their entire world was built on the appearance of wealth. And I, the quiet, awkward sister with the dusty job, was now, at least on paper, wealthier than all of them combined. A bitter, triumphant laugh escaped my lips. I could picture the scene in my head. I'd call a family meeting. I'd walk into Izzy's pristine living room, lay the authentication report on her glass coffee table, and watch the color drain from her face. I'd watch Mark's polished smile crumble as he realized the sheer scale of the opportunity they had literally thrown out the door. The fantasy was delicious. It was the perfect revenge. The ultimate, I told you so. But as I walked through the city streets, the fantasy began to sour. What would happen after that moment of triumph? The money would become a monster. It would twist our already fractured family into something unrecognizable. There would be lawsuits, accusations, and a bitterness that would curdle any chance we ever had of reconciling. My grandmother had entrusted this secret, this legacy, to someone. For some reason, it had ended up with me, and I had to believe she wouldn't have wanted it to become a weapon. Genevieve Dubois had created this painting as an act of survival, not as a tool for familial destruction. I had a choice to make. I could use this discovery to tear my family apart, or I could use it to build something better. But first, I needed to understand the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know how my grandmother fit into this story. My path was clear. I booked a flight to Paris. Paris in December is a city of cold stone and glittering lights. It felt a world away from the drama in Connecticut, a place where I could breathe and think. I wasn't on a vacation. I was on a pilgrimage, following the ghost of my grandmother. My only lead was the name on the back of the photograph, Genevieve, and a hunch that the answers I was looking for weren't in an art gallery, but somewhere quieter. My grandmother was a librarian, a woman of paper and ink. So I started my search in the one place that felt right. The old archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the National Library. For 3 days, I lost myself in the hushed silence of the reading rooms, poring over microfilms of Parisian newspapers and residential directories from the 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds. I was looking for any mention of Genevieve Dubois or her family. It was a tedious, eye-straining process, a search for a needle in a haystack the size of a city. On the 4th day, I found it. It was a small, easily missed notice in a 1946 newspaper, a list of individuals seeking information about family members lost during the war. One entry read, "Seeking information regarding the artist Genevieve Dubois, last seen in Paris, 1942. Please contact her brother, Antoine Dubois, at the address below." My hands trembled as I scribbled down the address. It was in Le Marais, the old Jewish quarter. Finding the apartment building was easy. It was a beautiful old structure with a wrought iron balcony, but the real question was whether anyone connected to Antoine Dubois still lived there more than 70 years later. I buzzed the concierge, my French rusty but passable. I explained that I was a historian researching a painter named Geneviève Dubois, and that I believed her brother, Antoine, had once lived here. The elderly concierge looked at me with weary eyes. Dubois? That name is familiar. The old man in 4B. He passed away many years ago. But his son, his grandson, I think, he still keeps the apartment. He comes once or twice a year to check on it. My heart leaped. Do you know how I could contact him? The concierge shrugged. He is here now. I saw him go up this morning. It felt like a miracle. I took the rickety cage-like elevator up to the 4th floor. The hallway was dark and smelled of old wood and beeswax. I stood before the door to apartment 4B for a long moment, my courage failing me. What was I even going to say? I finally took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened a crack, and a man who looked to be in his late 50s peered out. He had kind, tired eyes. Oui? Monsieur Dubois? I asked, my voice shaky. My name is Elena Rossi. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm researching your grand aunt, the painter Geneviève Dubois. I believe I may have found one of her paintings. The man's name was Luc. He stared at me for a moment, his expression shifting from suspicion to a deep, profound sadness. And then he opened the door wide. The apartment was like a time capsule. It was filled with old furniture, books, and photographs. It was clear that this was not just a property to Luc. It was a shrine to a family he had barely known. Over cups of strong black coffee, I told him my story. I told him about my grandmother, the attic, and the painting. I showed him pictures of it on my phone, the half-cleaned canvas glowing with life. And then I showed him the letter. He took it with a trembling hand and read the words his grand-aunt had written 80 years ago. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. We thought everything was lost, he whispered. My grandfather, Antoine, he survived the camps. He spent the rest of his life searching for his sister's work. He always believed, that at least one piece must have survived. It became his life's obsession. And then, Luc told me a story that finally connected all the dots. In the final, desperate days before Geneviève was captured, she entrusted her last painting to her closest friend, a young American librarian who was studying in Paris. The friend had promised to smuggle the painting back to the United States and keep it safe until the war was over. But in the chaos of the German occupation, the two friends lost contact. The American librarian made it home, but she never knew what happened to Geneviève. And Antoine, upon his return, never knew the name of the American friend his sister had entrusted with her legacy. My grandmother, Eleanor. My quiet, unassuming grandmother was the brave young librarian who had saved Genevieve's final masterpiece. She had kept her promise. She had kept the painting safe her entire life, hiding it in her attic, perhaps too scared or too heartbroken to ever reveal its existence. She had returned to Paris in 1953, I realized, not for a vacation, but to try and find Antoine, to return the painting to its rightful family. But she must have failed. She had kept the secret locked away, a burden she carried alone. Luc and I sat in silence for a while, absorbing the weight of this shared history. My grandfather died, believing he had failed his sister, Luc said softly. To know that her work survived, that her friend kept her promise, it would have given him peace. We talked for hours. I learned about the family I was now inexplicably linked to. Luc was a history teacher, a widower with 2 grown children. He had dedicated his life to preserving the memory of the family he had lost. As I prepared to leave, he stopped me at the door. This painting, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It does not belong to me. It belongs to the world. But my grand-aunt entrusted it to your grandmother. And now, it seems, it has been entrusted to you. Whatever you do with it, I know you will honor her memory. We promised to stay in touch. As I walked out into the Parisian twilight, the city's lights twinkling to life along the Seine. I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The trip had given me more than just answers. It had given me a profound sense of responsibility. This painting wasn't a lottery ticket. It wasn't a weapon for revenge. It was a legacy. A story of friendship, survival, and promises kept across generations. I knew now what I had to do. My plan for revenge had seemed so satisfying in my head, but now it felt petty and small in the face of this incredible story. But that didn't mean my sister and her husband were off the hook. Oh no. I wouldn't use the painting to humiliate them. I would use something far more powerful, the truth. And I would let their own actions, their own greed and arrogance, be their undoing. The first step was to return home. The second step was to wait. I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait very long. Returning to the States felt like stepping back into a different reality. The quiet, historical weight of Paris was replaced by the frantic, forward-looking energy of American life. I spent the first week back in a whirlwind of activity, working with Dr. Finch to finalize the authentication and appraisal documents. We decided to keep the discovery under wraps for a little while longer, giving me time to figure out my next move. The official valuation came back even higher than we had anticipated. With the newly discovered provenance and the incredible human story attached to it, the painting was now appraised at a staggering $15 million. I stared at the number on the page, and it felt like reading a foreign language. My life had been cleaved in two, the life before the painting and the life after. I hadn't heard a word from my sister or her husband since Thanksgiving. No angry voicemails, no guilt-tripping texts, not even a passive-aggressive email from my mother, who usually acted as the family's messenger. The silence was unsettling. It wasn't the silence of forgiveness. It was the silence of erasure. In their minds, I had ceased to exist. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, saw it differently. "They're ignoring you because they think they won," she said over coffee one afternoon. "In their world, they have everything, the house, the money, the status, and you have nothing. They're waiting for you to come crawling back with an apology, don't you dare." I had no intention of crawling back. I had a new plan, one that was slowly taking shape. It wasn't about a dramatic confrontation anymore. It was about observation. I remembered something my grandmother once told me. You can learn everything you need to know about a person by watching how they behave when they think no one is looking. So, I started looking. It wasn't hard. My sister and her husband lived their lives online. Izzy's Instagram was a daily chronicle of their supposed success. Posts about their new Sub-Zero refrigerator, Mark's new German sports car, their weekend trip to a 5-star resort in the Berkshires. It was a performance of wealth, designed to elicit envy. But I had a secret weapon they didn't know about. Mark was a real estate developer, and his business, like most businesses, had a public footprint. I started by doing some simple online searches, looking into his current projects. One project, in particular, was his crown jewel, a massive luxury condo development he had been talking about for years, called The Pinnacle. It was supposed to be his legacy. I found the project's official website. It was filled with glossy architectural renderings and promises of unparalleled luxury. But when I started digging into the public records on the county clerk's website, I found something interesting. A string of recent liens filed against the property by contractors. Plumbers, electricians, foundation specialists, all claiming they hadn't been paid for their work. This was a red flag. Liens are a sign of cash flow problems. A developer as successful as Mark shouldn't have cash flow problems. My curiosity piqued. I decided to take it a step further. I used a small portion of my own savings money I had earned from my actual restoration work to hire a private financial investigator. It felt ridiculously dramatic, like something out of a movie, but I needed to know the truth. I gave the investigator, a discreet and highly professional man named Mr. Davies, all the information I had. I told him I was a potential investor, considering working with Mark's company, and that I needed a thorough, confidential due diligence report. 2 weeks later, he delivered a thick file to my apartment. The contents were explosive. What Mr. Davies had uncovered was a house of cards. Mark's entire empire was built on a mountain of debt and risky, over-leveraged loans. The Pinnacle project was a disaster. He had broken ground based on projections from a booming market, but a recent downturn in the luxury real estate sector had left him with dozens of unsold units. The construction loans were coming due, and the investors were getting nervous. The sports car, the expensive trips, the designer clothes, it was all a facade, a desperate attempt to project success to keep his creditors at bay. According to Mr. Davies's analysis, Mark was on the brink of financial ruin. He was maybe 3 months, 6 at most, from total collapse. And Izzy, my perfect status-obsessed sister, was either completely in the dark or a willing participant in the charade. Suddenly, their behavior at Thanksgiving made a terrifying kind of sense. The desperation to impress the Hendersons wasn't just about social climbing. It was about securing a new investor. My inappropriate behavior hadn't just been a social embarrassment. It had been a potential threat to their financial survival. They had kicked me out not just because I was an inconvenience, but because I was a liability to their lie. The knowledge sat like a stone in my stomach. A part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction, the kind of dark pleasure you feel when karma appears to be doing its job. But a larger part of me felt a deep, profound sadness. My sister was living in a fantasy, and the walls were about to come crashing down around her. The painting, my $15 million secret, felt heavier than ever. It was a lifeboat, a golden ticket that could solve all their problems in an instant. The old Elena, the one who lived for her family's approval, would have run to them, authentication report in hand, ready to be their savior. She would have gladly handed over the money in exchange for a few fleeting moments of gratitude and acceptance. But I wasn't the old Elena anymore. Paris had changed me. My grandmother's story had changed me. I understood that true generosity isn't about bailing people out of the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let them fall, so they can learn how to get back up on their own. So, I waited. I went about my life. I continued the final, delicate stages of the painting's restoration, the in-painting of the areas where the old, clumsy repairs had been. I spoke with Luke in Paris every week, updating him on our shared legacy. I met with museum curators who, having heard whispers of the discovery, were already expressing intense interest in exhibiting the work. And I watched, from a distance, as the cracks in my sister's perfect life began to show. The Instagram posts became less frequent. The extravagant weekend trips stopped. One day, I saw on Zillow that a house 2 doors down from Izzy's, a nearly identical McMansion, had just sold for 20% less than its asking price. The housing market in their exclusive enclave was turning. The pressure on Mark must have been immense. Then, one cold Tuesday night in February, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in 3 months. Izzy. My heart started pounding. It was happening. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered. Hello? Her voice was different. The usual sharp, confident edge was gone, replaced by a strained, brittle cheerfulness. Elena, hi, it's been so long. I was just thinking about you, and I was wondering if you might be free to get together for coffee sometime this week. The game had begun. The invitation for coffee felt like a summons to a chess match, where I was the only one who could see the whole board. I agreed to meet her, choosing a neutral location. A small, busy cafe halfway between my apartment and her suburban kingdom. I wanted noise and anonymity. I didn't want the sterile quiet of her home or the cramped intimacy of mine. As I waited for her, sipping a latte, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nervous, eager-to-please sister was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own value, and it had nothing to do with a bank account. Izzy arrived 10 minutes late, a tactic she always used to establish dominance. But today, it didn't work. She looked frayed. The designer clothes were still there. The makeup was still perfect. But there was a tension around her eyes and a tightness in her smile that hadn't been there before. She was trying to project the same old, effortless superiority, but it was clear it was taking a monumental effort. "It's so good to see you," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You look, well." It was the kind of backhanded compliment she specialized in. What she meant was, "You still live in the city and dress like a grad student, but you don't look as pathetic as I expected." I just smiled. "You too, Izzy. How are things?" That was the opening she needed. For the next 20 minutes, she performed a monologue of her perfect life. She talked about a charity gala she was chairing, a new landscape designer she had hired, and how exhausted she was from planning their summer trip to the Amalfi Coast. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed fiction, and we both knew it. I listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, not interrupting, not challenging her. I just let her spin her web. Finally, she exhausted her supply of fabricated good news, and there was an awkward pause. She stirred her cappuccino, her eyes darting around the cafe, avoiding mine. This was it, the pivot. "You know," she began, her tone shifting to one of mock concern. "Mark and I were talking the other day, and we were just saying how we never really understood your little business. It must be tough doing that all on your own. Do you make a decent living from it?" It was so transparent, it was almost comical. The question wasn't about my well-being. It was an intelligence-gathering mission. She was probing for financial weakness, or, more accurately, for any sign of unexpected strength. I decided to give her nothing. "I get by," I said with a shrug. "It's more of a passion project, really. You know me. I've never been very ambitious." I could see the relief wash over her. My lack of ambition was comforting to her. It reinforced her narrative, her position as the successful, superior sister. She leaned in, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Well, that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. It's a bit awkward, but, you know Mark's Pinnacle project?" I feigned ignorance. "The big condo building? I think I saw a billboard for it once." "That's the one. Well, it's been incredibly successful. So successful, in fact, that we have a temporary, let's call it a cash flow situation." She laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "All the money is tied up in the final stages of construction, and we just have this amazing, time-sensitive opportunity to acquire the adjacent lot for Phase 2. The seller wants cash, and he wants it now." She took a deep breath. "So, I was thinking, I know Grandma left you that small inheritance, the stocks and bonds. You never did anything with it, did you? You just let it sit there." I knew exactly what she was talking about. Grandma Eleanor had left us each a modest portfolio worth about $50,000. Izzy had spent hers on a kitchen renovation within 6 months. I had kept mine, letting it grow slowly over the years. "I might still have it," I said cautiously. "Why?" Here it was, the ask. "Well, Mark and I were wondering if you would be willing to make a short-term investment in our company. Think of it as a family loan. We would need about $200,000. My face must have betrayed my shock at the amount, because she quickly added, "We would, of course, pay you back with a generous interest rate. 10%. You can't get that at a bank." It would be so much smarter than letting that money just sit there, collecting dust. You'd be helping your family, and you'd be making a smart financial move. It's a win-win! For a moment, I was speechless. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She had kicked me out of her life 3 months ago, hadn't spoken to me since, and now she was sitting here, asking to borrow 4 times the amount of my entire inheritance, framing it as if she were doing me a favor. She saw the hesitation on my face and misinterpreted it. She thought I was considering it. She leaned in further, her eyes gleaming with desperation. Think about it, Elena. This could be your chance to finally be a part of something big, something successful. Mark would be so grateful. We would be so grateful. We could finally put all that Thanksgiving nonsense behind us. She was offering me a transaction, my money in exchange for a conditional re-entry into the family. It was the most cynical, insulting proposition I had ever heard. I took a slow sip of my now cold latte, gathering my thoughts. The old me would have been torn. She would have been tempted by the offer of forgiveness, by the chance to finally be needed. But the new me saw the offer for what it was, a trap. "Izzy," I said, my voice calm and even. "I don't have $200,000. The mask of cheerful optimism on her face cracked. "What? Of course you do. Grandma's inheritance, plus whatever you've saved, is nowhere near that amount," I finished for her. "I'm sorry. I can't help you." Her expression hardened, the desperation turning to anger. "I don't believe you," she hissed, her voice low. "You're lying. You're just doing this to punish me for Thanksgiving. I knew it. You've always been so petty, so jealous of what Mark and I have. The accusations were so wild, so disconnected from reality, that I didn't even feel the need to defend myself. I just looked at her, a deep sense of pity washing over me. "I'm not lying, Izzy," I said softly. "And I'm not punishing you. I'm just telling you the truth. I can't give you money I don't have." I placed $10 on the table to cover our coffees. "It was good to see you." I stood up to leave. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of fury and panic. "This isn't over, Elena. Don't think you can just walk away. Family helps family." "You're right," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "They do." As I walked out of the cafe and into the bright, cold afternoon, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had passed the test. I hadn't taken the bait. I hadn't revealed my secret. But I had done something far more important. I had set the stage for the final act. She had shown me her hand. Now, it was time for me to show her mine. The week after our disastrous coffee meeting was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The offensive began with my mother. She called me, her voice laced with a carefully curated blend of disappointment and concern. "Elena, honey, I spoke to your sister. She told me about your conversation. I'm so disappointed in you." I didn't say anything, letting her continue. "Your sister is in a tough spot. Mark is trying so hard to build a future for their family, for our family. And you have the ability to help, but you're choosing to be selfish. All because of a little Thanksgiving squabble. It's not becoming, Elena. That's not how I raised you." I finally cut her off, my voice polite but firm. "Mom, this has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. It has to do with the fact that I don't have $200,000 to loan to anyone. It's that simple." There was a skeptical silence on the other end. "Well," she said finally, "I think you need to think long and hard about what family means." She hung up. Next came the text messages from unknown numbers, which I suspected were from some of Izzy's well-heeled friends. They were variations on a theme. "I heard you turned your back on your sister. Some people would kill to have a family like yours." It was a coordinated campaign of guilt and shame, designed to wear me down. But it had the opposite effect. Every message, every phone call just strengthened my resolve. The final, desperate move came a week later. I received a certified letter from a law firm. It was a formal proposal from Mark's company, offering me a minority stake in the Pinnacle's Phase 2 development in exchange for a $200,000 investment. It was official, legally binding, and utterly absurd. They were so convinced I was lying about the money, so certain that I was just holding out for a better deal, that they had actually paid a lawyer to draw up a contract. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the opening. I called my mother. "I need to have a family meeting," I said. "At my apartment. Sunday afternoon. You, Dad, Izzy, and Mark. It's important." I could hear the surprise in her voice, but she agreed. She likely thought their pressure campaign had worked and that I was finally ready to capitulate. Sunday arrived, gray and cold. My small apartment felt charged with anticipation. I had spent the morning preparing. I didn't tidy up or try to make my space look like something it wasn't. I wanted them to see my reality. On my coffee table, I placed a single, thick folder. The painting of Genevieve Dubois, now fully restored to its former glory, stood on the easel in my workshop, the door to which was slightly ajar, the canvas just visible from the living room. They arrived together, a united front. Mark looked impatient, checking his watch as if he had better places to be. Izzy had her game face on, a cool, unreadable expression. My parents looked anxious. They sat stiffly on my sofa, a stark contrast to the comfortable way Chloe always flopped down on it. "All right, Elena," Mark began, taking charge as always. "We're here. I assume this means you've come to your senses and are ready to discuss our very generous offer." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. "Actually, no. I'm not here to discuss your offer. I'm here to tell you the truth." I picked up the folder from the coffee table. "A few months ago, you kicked me out of your house on Thanksgiving because I brought a painting with me. A painting you called junk." Izzy rolled her eyes. "Oh my God. Are we really back to this? It was a dirty old painting, Elena. Get over it." "You're right," I said. "It was a dirty old painting." I opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of the painting as it looked now, the vibrant poppies and lilies practically glowing against the dark background. "This is what it looks like after I cleaned it." Mark glanced at it dismissively. "Okay, so you cleaned it. It's still just a bunch of flowers. What's your point?" "My point," I said, my voice steady, "is that this isn't just a painting of flowers." I slid another document across the table. It was the report from the infrared reflectography, showing the hidden self-portrait underneath. The artist, a woman named Genevieve Dubois, painted this over her own self-portrait to hide it from the Nazis before she was sent to a concentration camp where she died. The mood in the room shifted. My mother gasped. Even Mark looked momentarily intrigued. "This is the only known surviving work of hers in the entire world," I continued. "And it ended up in Grandma Eleanor's attic because Grandma was the friend in Paris who Genevieve entrusted it to. She saved its life." I let that sink in. I told them the whole story about Luke, about the letter, about our grandmother's promise. When I finished, the room was silent. Izzy was staring at the picture of the restored painting, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "So it's a nice story," she said finally, her voice lacking its usual conviction. "But what does that have to do with anything? It's still just an old painting. It doesn't solve our problem." "That's where you're wrong," I said. I pulled out the final document from the folder. It was the official appraisal, the one with the letterhead from the world's most respected art valuation firm. I placed it on the table in front of them. "This dirty old painting," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and power I didn't know I possessed, "has been conservatively valued at $15 million. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. My father, who had been silent the entire time, let out a strangled noise. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Mark snatched the paper from the table, his eyes scanning the document frantically, his face turning a pale, sickly white. But it was Izzy's reaction that I will never forget. She didn't look at the paper. She looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw a tidal wave of emotions. Disbelief, shock, envy, and then a raw, bottomless greed that was terrifying to behold. For a moment, no one could speak. The only sound was the rustling of the paper in Mark's shaking hands. 15 million? He stammered, looking from the appraisal to me and back again. This is a joke. This has to be a joke. I assure you it's not, I said. I stood up and walked over to my workshop door, pushing it open fully. The painting stood there on the easel, illuminated by the workshop light. It was magnificent. The colors were so rich, so full of life and sorrow, it seemed to breathe. It was a masterpiece, and it was undeniably real. They all stared at it, mesmerized. It was the physical proof they couldn't deny. Izzy finally found her voice. It was a strange, high-pitched sound, a desperate grasp at control. Well, that's wonderful news for the family, she said, forcing a smile. With that kind of money, our little cash flow problem will be solved in no time. We'll have to decide how to split it up, of course. 50-50 seems fair, right, Elena? I just looked at her, my heart breaking a little at her complete inability to see beyond the money. No, Izzy, I said softly. It's not 50-50. It's not the family's money. It's mine. The silence that followed my statement was the loudest I had ever heard. It was a silence filled with the shattering of expectations, the collapse of assumptions. Mark was the first to explode, his carefully constructed composure finally breaking. What do you mean yours? He sputtered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. That painting was in your grandmother's house. That makes it family property. We are entitled to half of it. My father, looking bewildered, chimed in. Elena, Mark has a point. Your grandmother would have wanted us to share. I held up a hand, cutting him off. The time for being quiet and letting others speak for me was over. No, Dad. You're wrong. I walked back over to the coffee table and pulled one last item from the folder. It was a copy of my grandmother's will. I had a lawyer review Grandma's will last week, I said, my voice calm and measured. It's very clear. The house and its major assets, the furniture, the jewelry, the financial accounts were to be divided between her two daughters, Mom and Aunt Carol. Izzy and I received specific, smaller bequests. But the will also contains a residuary clause. It states, and I quote, all remaining personal property, including any and all miscellaneous contents of the home not otherwise specified, I bequeath to my granddaughter, Elena Rossi, in recognition of her appreciation for history and her gentle hand in preserving the past. I let the legal jargon sink in. The painting was not a specified asset, I explained. It was a miscellaneous item in the attic. Legally, Grandma left it to me, and only me. I looked directly at Izzy. You told me to get my precious painting and get out of your house. I did exactly what you said. I took my property, which you had deemed worthless, and I left. Izzy's face crumpled. The greed was replaced by a raw, ugly desperation. You can't do this, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. We're sisters. We're family. You wouldn't let us lose everything when you have that. It was a stunning reversal. The powerful, condescending sister was now pleading, begging for a handout from the very person she had thrown away. Mark, seeing that aggression had failed, switched tactics. He tried to appeal to my sense of guilt. Elena, think about what you're doing. The Pinnacle is more than just a building. It's jobs. It's a legacy. A small investment from you would save all of that. It's the right thing to do. I looked at this man who had dismissed me, at this sister who had humiliated me, and I felt a sudden, profound clarity. I thought of Geneviève Dubois, hiding her final masterpiece. I thought of my grandmother, carrying that secret for a lifetime. This painting wasn't about bailouts or legacies built on debt. It was about survival, honor, and promises kept. My answer is still no, I said. I will not be investing in your project. I will not be giving you a loan. And I will not be splitting this with you. I then turned to my parents. And I am deeply hurt that your first reaction to this incredible news wasn't pride or happiness for me, but to immediately figure out how my discovery could benefit everyone else. That seemed to hit my mother the hardest. She looked down at her hands, a flicker of shame on her face. The meeting ended after that. There was nothing more to say. They left my apartment not as a united front, but as four separate, defeated individuals. The aftermath was swift and brutal. 2 months later, Mark's company declared bankruptcy. The Pinnacle project was sold off, for pennies on the dollar, to one of his competitors. They lost the house, the cars, and the carefully curated life they had built. The last I heard, they had moved into a small rental apartment 2 towns over. Izzy's Instagram went silent. Her performance was, for now, over. 6 months have passed since that day. My life has changed in ways I could have never imagined. I didn't sell the painting. After a long conversation with Luke, we decided it didn't belong in a private collection. It belonged to the world. We worked together to facilitate its donation to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where it is now the centerpiece of a new exhibition on lost female artists of the 20th century. It hangs there, under the name The Last Poppies, with a small plaque that tells the story of Geneviève Dubois and of the 2 friends, an artist and a librarian, who saved it. In exchange for the donation, the museum made a substantial contribution to a foundation I established in my grandmother's name, the Eleanor Rossi Foundation for Art Preservation, which provides grants to underfunded museums and aspiring young restorers like me. I no longer work out of my tiny apartment. The foundation has given me a state-of-the-art lab and a small, dedicated team. I'm doing the work I love on a scale I never dreamed possible. My relationship with my family is complicated. It's a work in progress, a slow restoration of its own. My parents have apologized, and I believe they are trying to understand. We're talking, really talking, for the first time in years. As for Izzy, she called me about a month ago. It was an awkward, stilted conversation. She's working now, as a receptionist at a dental office. She apologized. Not for the money, but for Thanksgiving. She said she was sorry for making me feel small. It was a start. I don't know if we'll ever be close in the way I once hoped, but maybe we can be something more honest. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this wasn't about the value of art or the poison of greed. It was about my own worth. For so long, I had allowed my family's opinion of me to define me. Their dismissal of my passions made me feel like my passions were worthless. But the truth is, the very skills they ridiculed, my patience, my attention to detail, my love for things others had discarded, were the very things that allowed me to uncover this miracle. They thought my quiet life was a sign of failure, but it was in that quiet that I found a strength they never could have understood. The painting didn't make me valuable. I was valuable all along. It just took a forgotten masterpiece to make me finally see it. If you've ever had to find your own worth outside of your family's expectations, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. What did you learn from the experience? Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the things that people throw away are the most valuable treasures of all.